thank you all for being here, for braving the cold, rainy weather. I hope it's going to be worth your while. Before we get started with this, though, I wanted to just tell you a quick story, if I could. Last week I was in Texas. One thing that you all may notice, you may have been aware of, is we have gridlock in Washington when Congress can't get anything done, and actually the things that they do, we wish they weren't doing. More and more of the responsibility of preserving freedom, of keeping what our forefathers intended this country to be, are falling to the states. So I was invited last week to go down and meet with some folks at the Locke Foundation equivalent, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and talk to them about what I was hoping was what some of the states were doing. So I was down there and in Texas, and I learned a lot. I'll tell you, one of the things that I learned is that Texans are really competitive. Anybody here from Texas? Well, you all know what I'm talking about. So I was talking to our cohorts there in Texas and said that, you know, I was interested in states working together and sharing ideas and getting the best ideas together of what different states were doing around the country. And my friends in Texas told me, well, you know, we don't really care what they do in other states. We are the best. We know we are the best state in the country. We're Texas. For example, we have really low taxes in Texas. I said, well, you know, as a matter of fact, we just reformed our tax system. We have really low taxes in North Carolina. They said, well, you know, we have a regulatory environment down here that's really encouraging businesses. We're making the best use of our oil and gas. We have a thriving IT industry here in Texas. And I said, well, we've just getting ready to pass all the rules and regulations to make the best use of our oil and gas, offshore drilling we're looking at. We have a thriving IT department at Research Triangle Park here in North Carolina. I said, well, we have really good school choice here in Texas. As a matter of fact, we're going to try to get a voucher bill through during our next legislative session. I said, well, in North Carolina, we passed a voucher bill last year. I said, well, we are the second largest state in the country. As a matter of fact, 1,000 people are moving to Texas every day, most of them from California. I said, well, North Carolina is now the 9th largest state in the country. We are the fastest growing state in the Southeast, but I tell you what, as those nuts are rolling out of California, if you all are willing to stop them there in Texas and keep them there, we're willing to give you that. They say you can't mess with Texas. I'm very happy to be here to do the Shaftesbury talk. As many of you all know, the Shaftesbury series that we have such interesting speakers, we have such smart speakers. You know, I always learn something whenever I come. I'm delighted to be part of that now. And I'll tell you, I get to do the Shaftesbury talk every 2 years. And this is part of a deal that John Hood offered me when I came to work here. He said, if you will go down to the General Assembly and spend every waking hour with those politicians down on Jones Street, I will let you give the Shaftesbury talk once every 2 years. So here I am, and I'm happy to be here. Now, while we're talking, I just want to put some things up on this whiteboard. The 4 R's that I'm going to be talking about today. You know, you've heard of the 3 R's. Well, at the Locke Foundation, we're overachievers. So the words that I'm going to put up here are reason, reform, recovery, and roll. And you'll see how all this makes sense, I hope, as I go through this. So at the beginning of the 2015 session, and as Donna mentioned, we've been working on some things. We've been working on our agenda where we want to see things go during this next biennium session. But to understand where we're going to go and the suggestions that we make, what we really need to do is to put this into perspective. So if you would, come back with me to this time in 2011, early January in 2011. What did we have at that time? We had high unemployment. Our unemployment rate at that time was over 10%. North Carolina fluctuated between 3rd, 4th, 5th in the country with the highest unemployment rate. Whoops. We had a $2.4 billion debt to the federal government that was costing our employers across the state money every month. We had the highest tax burden in the Southeast. We had burdensome regulations that were killing jobs, prohibiting businesses from moving to North Carolina. We had schools, failing schools, with kids stuck in those schools with no way out, no options, no alternatives for them. We had roads and infrastructure that was built not on need, not on where safety measures were taken into consideration, but purely on political patronage. And the other thing, too, that you might recall, in January of 2011, we were under the federal stimulus money. That year, we got over $1 billion into our state budget. Now, what you may recall about that is, after promises of job creation, of creating an economy, of stimulating an economy, it did not create jobs. It just expanded social programs and grew government. So that's where we were in January of 2011. What happened? Well, we had an election in 2010. For the first time in 140 years, we had a Republican-controlled General Assembly. We had new leadership that was interested in new ideas, in a new direction, that wanted to turn the state around, that wanted to do those things that we had been talking about. And we had a fresh look at ideas that the John Locke Foundation had been advocating for 25 years. Since 1990, we have advocated for ideas of economic prosperity, of limited government, of personal responsibility, of people being able to pursue their dreams and realize the American dream, to look for jobs, realizing that jobs are what create, government does not create jobs, that businesses create jobs. Economic prosperity is to the benefit of everyone, and especially poor people. So, again, the election, we have a new leadership, we have a new direction, and we have a new interest in the John Locke Foundation ideas. And so as things got underway, we began to see reforms that occurred in 2011 when the General Assembly went into session. We saw spending reforms. We saw a different way of looking at the budget. We saw a responsibility to taxpayers. Instead of the budget increasing year after year by tremendous percentages, we saw a different looking at priority, of looking at what is the core function of government before those spending priorities were put into place. You know, the budget has actually grown over the years, but it's the priorities and the spending that have changed. You hear these allocations from the left of these draconian cuts, of the budget being slashed. It's much more of a reprioritizing where that money is going. We've had tax reform. I mentioned that earlier. In 2011, the first tax that was reformed was actually the sales tax. You may all recall that there was a sales tax, a 1 penny sales tax that was set to expire. Beverly Perdue, who was the governor at the time, fought tooth and nail to keep that sunset in place. The new leadership realized that the way to get the economy moving was to lower taxes. They let that sunset expire on the sales tax. And do you know what 1 penny in the sales tax equates to? That is a $1 billion return of taxpayer money into the economy, back to taxpayers. We lowered the personal income tax. We flattened that rate, so now every North Carolinian pays the same rate of personal income. The corporate tax has been reduced from 6.9%. This year it will be 5%. And we repealed the death tax also and made some other changes. What we know is, what we learned, what we know from academic research is that lower taxes lead to economic growth. We saw regulatory reform. We saw cost-benefit analysis introduced into our regulations for the very first time. We saw an annual regular review of rules that are put into place. No longer will rules in North Carolina that have been in place for 50 years just be allowed to stand no matter what, with no look back on whether or not those still are reasonable, whether we should still have those. property rights. One of the first things that Republicans did, you may recall, the new General Assembly, and again, what else does John Locke advocate for but property rights? For 50 years, property owners across North Carolina had been the victim of forced annexation with no say-so at all in whether or not cities could go out and take over their land, begin to charge them higher taxes with no representation at all. We had comprehensive annexation reform where that can no longer be allowed here in North Carolina. Education choice for families across North Carolina. We no longer have a cap on charter schools. Charter schools are flourishing across North Carolina. We have 11 new charter schools that will go on board next year. We also have a voucher program for low-income students. So now low-income students across North Carolina can have the same advantage, the same opportunities that people who are better off have had for years. But with that too, with school choice, we know that many families, most families, no matter what, will choose to stay in the traditional public school system. So we've had a different way of looking at that. We have accountability. We have an increase in teacher pay, but we also have a focus on paying good teachers well, on pay based on performance. Infrastructure. For years, again, we had transportation, we had roads and bridges built depending on which politicians lived in what particular district. There was not a consideration of where are the needs, where's the congestion, how can we get people to work quicker, how can we move goods across North Carolina so that it benefits our businesses and continues that economic prosperity. So the reforms in education, we've had public funding changes in our in our infrastructure system, which is going to make this work much better and be more responsive to what the really needs are. So these are the reforms that we've had since 2011. You have to stop and ask yourself, okay, are all these transformational changes, are these things working? And what we've seen is, absolutely they're working. Jobs are being created. We have an unemployment rate now not in double digits, but 5.8%. We are competitive with our neighbors, clearly. We have the $2.6 billion debt to the federal government has paid down. We now only owe $450 million and expect that to be paid off in full in early spring. Again, getting North Carolina's fiscal house in order. We have 11 new charter schools, and hundreds or thousands of North Carolina families are taking care of the vouchers that are available now to them for the first time. 99,000 new jobs were created in North Carolina last year. We are a leader in job creation here in North Carolina. Again, the economy is turning around. We're making a difference. Things are changing. The real GDP and the personal income growth is growing at a faster rate than our neighbors in the Southeast. So it would be disingenuous to say that any one of these factors are the reason that North Carolina's economy is turning around. It would be disingenuous to say we've reformed the tax system, so North Carolina's economy is booming. It's all of these things in combination that we're starting to see a recovery in North Carolina. And the recovery in North Carolina is stronger and it's faster than our neighbors are. We still have a long way to go. And so the question becomes, what will we do during the 2015 General Assembly session? Will we continue these motions that are the initiatives that have been put into place? So here's some of the things that we're suggesting and some of the things that we would like to see move forward. Further spending reforms. Again, you hear the left talk about these budget cuts, slashing the budget. What we're really talking about is a $20+ billion budget. It's where you spend that money and how you prioritize the spending. We need to go back and look at many of the things that we're spending and evaluate whether we still need them or not. We need to go to zero-based budgeting, where budgeting takes place on what the real needs are today, not based on what was done last year or 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Just because you funded it before doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good expenditure of money now. And along the same lines, when we see a program that's working, when we see a function of government that is working well, we may choose to spend more money on that. But it takes an evaluation and a really serious prioritizing of those budget items. We need to rebuild the reserves. One of the downsides of many of the policies that were put into place over many years of big spending government is that we've drained down all of our reserve accounts. Our savings accounts are gone. We need to rebuild those. So as we move into 2015, as we see what the revenue is, as we see what the needs are, when we have additional money, rather than trying to find new programs to fund, rather than trying to grow government, we need to put that money into the state savings account, much like you would in, Jenna.
Just real quick, where are we right now on the capital gains and the per child? What are those numbers? What are they currently?
I don't know. The per child tax credit is $250. John, help me with this.
They just raised it.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. Sorry. And actually, this brings me to a good point. Jenna, with your question, all of these things that I'm talking about, the John Locke Foundation has written extensively on all of these. So in answer to your question, I promise you it is on our website somewhere, I promise. So any of the questions that you might have as we're going through this, all of these are things that the Locke Foundation has written about for 25 years. Roy, help me.
Capital gains is treated like regular.
Okay.
And it should.
So it's at 5.75.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so as we move into 2015 and as we see the previous tax reforms that have put into place sort of equalize and things begin to settle back down, if there is an appetite and if there is an interest in making additional tax reforms, the suggestions that we would have would be to repeal or reform the capital gains tax. And Roy has written an excellent piece on this recently that explains this in detail, and to increase the per child tax credit. We were a little concerned in the tax reforms that there was an unintended bias towards married couples with large families. So we would suggest increasing the per child tax credit to eliminate that in the current tax reforms. We'd also look at education in the classroom. North Carolina pays 56% of our state budget goes for education. Pick up a Fast Fact card, the newest Fast Fact cards when you're on your way out too. 56% of our budget goes for education, so it has to be a clear focus for the General Assembly. What we would like to see move towards is a performance-based pay. I mentioned that all teachers in North Carolina got a pay increase during last year. It was an average of 7%. But one thing that you don't hear enough about is every teacher got a pay increase. What we need to start thinking about now is not how much we pay teachers, but how we pay teachers, and to ensure that the best teachers are in the classroom and those best teachers are rewarded for the excellent work that they're doing. We also would like to see more vouchers offered to disadvantaged kids. When these opportunity scholarships became available to students in North Carolina, there was a tremendous response to it. There were a lot of families who wanted to take advantage of that, and we need to expand that and make that available to more disadvantaged families across North Carolina. Affordable energy. This is something that we've got to focus on here in North Carolina. When the cost of energy goes up, everything goes up. It impacts not only those of us that are paying our monthly power bill at our home or our apartment, but it greatly impacts businesses. And it also impacts us as consumers, and it impacts us as taxpayers as we're paying the electric bill for all of the government buildings across the state. One of the things that we could do that would go really far to getting energy costs back down where they're affordable and there's an efficient method of producing that energy is to repeal the renewable portfolio standards. You may recall in 2007 the General Assembly passed a bill that required that 12.5% of our energy come from renewable energy sources and conservation methods. This is something that we have advocated since before that bill passed, and we are going to continue to fight for that to repeal the renewable portfolio standards and ensure that our energy comes from the most efficient, most cost-effective manner that it possibly can. We're going to enable and encourage exploration. I mentioned earlier with the hydraulic fracturing, the gas exploration. The rules are scheduled to go into place in early 2015. The General Assembly anticipates beginning to issue permits for hydraulic fracturing in North Carolina. If there is a need, if the industry is interested in it, we want to create the environment so that they can come to North Carolina and do that. And those permits are scheduled to be available in early spring. Also, you've heard the governor talk. The General Assembly will be talking more about offshore drilling, exploring for gas and oil off of North Carolina's coast. This is a resource. It is a huge economic boon where we have seen this in other states. It has transformed economies in other states, and we want to be in a position in North Carolina to take advantage of that. Sensible regulations. We need to remove the barriers to occupations. North Carolina has these occupational licensing requirements. We have more of these than just about any state. My colleague John Sanders has written extensively about this. You know, do you really need a license? Do you really have to pay for a license? Do you really have to have a required number of hours in order to be an African hair braider? Do you really need that to protect the public safety from locksmiths? It goes on and on and on. And again, North Carolina has more of these very restrictive barriers to entering occupations. And if we're going to encourage people to be educated, to choose a career path, to make investments in their careers, to begin to provide for themselves and their families, to have jobs that they find rewarding careers, to pursue their dreams here in North Carolina, we need to remove the barriers from entering occupations rather than put up additional barriers. And again, John Sanders has written exclusively about this. We need to rein in rulemaking and executive authority. We need to make sure that all of the rules, all of the regulations, all of the laws that impact our lives every day are made by accountable elected officials. So that's something else that we're going to be working on during this next session coming up. Fixing health care. How do we do that? I think that we need to think about not only fixing health care, but rethinking health care altogether. In North Carolina, we have some of the most restrictive, some of the strictest certificate of need laws in the country. This is a very complicated issue. Catherine Restrepo has done a wonderful job of breaking that down in a way that we can understand, we can go in and we can attack it. But in order to get healthcare costs down, like anything else, you want as much competition in the field as you can possibly get. And with certificate of need laws in North Carolina, we don't have that. That's something that we need to go and again break those barriers down so that the free market can work. We need to reform Medicaid. But even further than that, I would suggest that we need to rethink Medicaid. We need to think about the way that we're going to provide health care options for people who truly need our help, and then offer assistance for those that maybe just need a bridge or need a hand up. So there's some real opportunities there, again, not just to reform Medicaid, but to rethink Medicaid. And Catherine's going to be writing more about that during the session as we move along. And then there's a lot of talk about Medicaid expansion. Some states have done this. Some states have asked for waivers from the federal government. You know, we'll expand Medicaid if you let us do whatever. What we've seen is this has not worked in other states, and it's not going to work here in North Carolina. What my suggestion to the General Assembly is to delay Medicaid expansion. We need to delay until we see what the Supreme Court is going to decide on some of these provisions that are written into Obamacare and how that might affect the Medicaid program across the country and specifically here in North Carolina. We need to delay and wait and see what this new United States Congress may do with Obamacare, whether there'll be some changes there that would make our Medicaid system look very different. And third, we need to delay until after the 2016 election, quite frankly, and see who is going to be the president, who will be the Congress, who will be in a position to either change Obamacare entirely, to rethink the way that we provide that, or, you know, other options that might be available. So that's our recommendation: delay on Medicaid expansion. And we need to further define the role of government. We need to talk about what the core function of government is, and to ensure that North Carolina state government is complying with those parameters of the role of government, but is not an overreach of that. One thing that we need to do is fix the MAP Act. Those of you that are regular Shaftesbury attendees, I see several people shaking their heads. We had the attorney from Greensboro come in and talk about the MAP Act and the restrictions on people's property that the Department of Transportation is imposing on people as they're planning where roads are going to go. This, I believe, will be the key property rights issue going into this 2015 session, and you have heard, we have written about this at the Locke Foundation, and you'll be hearing more about it as well. Question incentives, this whole corporate giveaway, this whole crony capitalism, John Sanders has written about it extensively, whether it's for film incentives, whether it's for historic buildings, whether it's for Google, whether it's for Mercedes-Benz. We believe that the best incentive is a well-skilled workforce, a low tax rate, a friendly regulatory environment, and you create a fair playing field where all businesses can compete in North Carolina, and may the best man win. And we will continue to advocate for that. And the other thing, too, is to plan wisely. You know, the John Locke Foundation has been around for 25 years. We have laid out what we believe is the plan for North Carolina, not only for the next 25 years, but for the next 100 years, forever. And we would suggest that the General Assembly do the same. Don't make decisions based on a 2-year election cycle. Think forward, think long term. The ship is beginning to turn around. It's going to take a long time to get where we need to go. But again, a long-term plan is the answer to North Carolina's economic prosperity and health. And at last, but certainly not least, is as this momentum has begun, as we're starting to see these reforms go into place, as we are seeing the recovery and the economic prosperity that is beginning to realize here in North Carolina, we don't want to roll back on these provisions. We want to continue the momentum. So, all right, let me just catch up with my notes here, sorry. Okay, so the next area that I want to cover is, I think that gives you a pretty good idea of the reason for all of these reforms, the reason for this transformational changes in North Carolina, the reforms that have put into place, the recovery that we're seeing, and what our suggestions are going forward. So what can you do, and what are we going to be doing at the John Locke Foundation? Well, I'll give you 3 F words as to what you can do and what we're going to be doing. The first one is freedom. Now, as we get into the General Assembly session, the last biennium that we had, there were 2,162 bills that were filed that had some kind of action at the General Assembly. That's pretty standard, and we're expecting the same thing. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we're going to be looking at over 2,000 bills over the next two years. Now, as those things begin to get filed, and Senator Suchek, you know how this process goes, we'll see a flurry of bills being proposed. We'll see some as we go through the session, then we'll see some at the very end of the session. And you're going to hear things about, well, this is a good bill because it's a Republican bill. You know, I'm not sure that really means anything anymore. You know, how do you tell? How do you tell what is a good issue? How do you tell whether we're moving in the right direction? You know, I've also heard this is a conservative bill. Well, sometimes it is. I can't tell you how many lobbyists have approached me in the last couple of years and said, I got a great free market bill you're going to love. You can get behind this. And often it's not. So here's what we're going to be doing, and what I would suggest to you. As we look at these pieces of legislation, as we look at these ideas, as we're talking to legislators, we're going to apply the freedom test. And we're going to ask, does this promote freedom? Does this protect freedom? Or does this restrict freedom? Does this grow government? Does this take my freedom away from me? And so I would suggest that that's what you look at too. And we'll be giving you some guidance with that. We're also going to be having some more information about this freedom index, this whole idea of a freedom test. For those of you who have signed up to come to our anniversary dinner that Donna mentioned on February 7th, we're going to be rolling it out at the dinner, and we're going to be providing a lot more information over the next year on North Carolina freedom and what that means, and North Carolina's drive to become the first in freedom. So again, the freedom test will be applied to all of these ideas as we move along, and I suggest that you do the same, and we'll be giving you some guidance and, of course, sharing our ideas. The other F word that I want to suggest to you is facts. As we move forward, our job at the John Locke Foundation is to make sure that you have the facts that you need to be an advocate for freedom, that the members of the General Assembly have those facts in front of them. And we do that in a variety of ways. Most of you know that. We have Carolina Journal that comes out every month. We have research papers, we have research newsletters. As a matter of fact, I put cards on your table. If you are not getting our research staff's newsletters, if you're not getting Carolina Journal, if you're not getting our emails, you need this information to have the facts. What our job is to give you the ammunition that you need in order to be an effective advocate for freedom and prosperity and economic prosperity here in North Carolina. We do not want you to embarrass yourself by going out and saying things like, North Carolina cut education freedom by $500 million last year. We're going to give you the facts that you need in order to make those arguments and in order to be an effective advocate. And the third F word that I would suggest to you is to follow through. You know, don't let this meeting be a meet, eat, and retreat. You know, what we will be doing is we will be at the forefront. What I would ask you to do is, if any of the issues that come up, anything that you see in the newspaper, anything that you see on our website, anything you see anywhere, if it is something that you care about, call your legislator, write a letter to the editor, let them know what your feelings will. I will tell you too that any of our information that you might choose to use on your social media, on your Facebook page, anywhere, just give us attribution, but please use and distribute our work. Follow through that way. Share our information with anybody that you think might have an interest. And the other thing as far as follow through is to support the John Locke Foundation. I will tell you, looking back to 2011, our influence has grown tremendously. The responsibility that we have to be thought leaders, influencers, that anchor of freedom has grown more than I can even tell you. We are constantly and consistently asked to offer thoughts on proposed legislation, on legislation that has been passed, to testify before legislative committees, to meet with decision makers across North Carolina, to make these decisions, to offer our guidance, our thoughts, the anchor that we provide to the community. So, and I know that many people in this room are supporters of the Locke Foundation, and I want to say thank you. All of us want to thank you for that support. Please consider perhaps giving a little bit more. If you are not a supporter of the John Locke Foundation, this year, 2015, our 25th anniversary, there is no better time to help us make our megaphone louder, to make our voice louder, to be even a greater influence for freedom and economic prosperity, for limited government, for personal responsibility in North Carolina. It's a powerful message, it's an important message, and I hope that you will join with us as we move forward through 2015. So in the wrap-up, let me just go over my list again, if you'll let me. So I hope that I've explained to you that the reason, that the work for all of the stuff that the John Locke Foundation has done for 25 years is there. The foundation has been laid. It is all there for you and everybody else across North Carolina to pick up and use. The reforms have begun. We are starting to see a recovery across North Carolina. We're starting to turn things around. We will be first in freedom if we continue about this. So as we move into 2015, let me leave you with, let's roll. So.